This is a perfect segue from Jim's discussions earlier, because what road mapping is about is, okay, I get these prerequisites and conditions, but how do we get there? How do we do this now as an organization? How do we take a big step instead of small, little incremental steps? Because you can pilot and prototype yourself to death. You can keep saying, okay, I'm going to keep trying to pilot little things, and that's a good way to learn. It's a good way to bet small. It's a good way to move forward. Or you could begin to say, how do I design? It's not quite waterfall versus agile, but there is a parallel here somewhere. Is there some semi-waterfall view that we then iterate through in an agile way? Okay? And one of the things that we've learned is, because innovation as a host process is fragile, and what I mean by that is, when you go into most organizations today and say, what's your innovation process? It may not even be documented. Or if it's documented, it was recently documented. Go into most organizations today and say, what does your CRM process look like? There's a manual. 10, 15 years ago, there was no manual. It was called Salesforce automation. There was no manual, and the Salesforce CRM process was immature. So today, the host process is kind of a little weak, which means you get tons of point solutions. How many times we're asked, just give us a suggestion box, we're going to be more innovative. Jim and all of you know here, that's a joke. That's not going to solve your culture issues. That's one point. Or give me one workshop on mindset. Well, that's helpful. That's just one point. Or, you know, in fact, we have Kevin Greigel, my colleagues in Las Vegas, we had a client call us and say, could you please write a job description for a chief innovation officer? We've decided to get serious about innovation. And about an hour into it, we persuaded them it was a terrible decision, and they were like, we can't believe you're changing our mind. We just said, bad move. You really ought to step back and look at what you're trying to do, what's the organization, the process, and then hire, probably from the inside, the right next chief innovation officer. So point solutions, tyrannize, we're very concerned about that. And lastly, the questions we get when innovation is being rebooted, when it is starting in a new SBU, or back to Jim and Moises' comments, when people get serious, when real cash is being put on the table, real investment's going to be made. These are the top four. These are some of the top four. How do we organize? What kind of leader are we looking for? How do we measure? What are the KPIs? What enabling technologies and tools? So rather than trying to solve any one of these, we have been working with clients and organizations and working on how to define this innovation gap. How do we define this gap? How do we help you define it collaboratively so that collaboratively and with some teamwork, you can take that walk over from wherever you are to the future in a more holistic, programmatic way? Sounds easy, very hard to do, because it goes against the notion of get something done today. It's going to take some time. It goes against the notion of sometimes experimentation. There's experimentation within this, but it does take planning, consensus, agreement. So we're going to share with you one way you may want to work toward this bigger step up of your innovation efforts. And it's certainly a way that we think dramatically reduces risk, dramatically accelerates how you move forward in a bigger way. Okay? And in particular, you know, we keep asking, how big is your innovation gap? Do you know how big your innovation gap is? And often, you know, you could say, well, you know, organically we're growing 4.2% and the business wants to grow 6%. Okay, that's for the CFO. Now you're 1.8% off. But what does that mean from a capability standpoint? How does that translate into all the key 6 dimensions you're about to see, the 6 attributes? How does that translate into what you have to change this year, next year, to be that innovative machine, the engine that Jim talks about? Inspiration for our work comes from doing this in innovation and in other functional disciplines, plus working with clients. And interestingly, after client projects, people saying, gosh, I don't have context for the bigger change. I just worked on one piece. I worked on insight or foresight, but I don't have an idea of execution. Or I've got PPM working on the portfolio management side, but my front end's broken. So it's come from that help, but it's also influenced by some other research. And in particular, I don't know who's a Joseph Campbell fan. Anybody? I'm a Joseph Campbell nut. In terms of the notion, you know, all of you are fans if you ever watched Star Trek, not Star Trek, Star Wars or The Hobbit. I mean, it's a classic model of you know, departure, and it's a cycle of learning and evolution. But what's very interesting about it is it's the idea that an organization or a person or a community has to learn a lot by going through various phases and stages to get to the prize, to get to the winning situation. And likewise, Erik Erikson's work around psychosocial stages, which is just fascinating stuff, I think, for those of you who care about stage work in your organizations or yourself personally. Influenced by that, too, because clearly Erik's work suggests that there are very distinct capabilities at different phases or levels at different points of our lives, and that these are archetypes that transcend culture, transcend time, and I think we find that kind of work fascinating if you can apply it to innovation. Exelon, and Dennis is here, and Brian was going to comment on this. You know, we've talked to Brian, and we're delighted to be working with Exelon. You know, one of his comments was, you know, this stuff's all flaky, is what he used to think. And then increasingly, as they started allocating bigger dollars and more people, the only way to work with management to make these commitments was to have a maturity plan. Otherwise, you had no ROI case to defend. Why are we doing this at this time? So it's context for making bigger bets, bigger decisions across the enterprise. And I would focus on, it's the trade-offs in taking action. I mean, one of the great, I mean, for some of you in this room, one of the barriers you may be facing is, how do I get my teams to make a decision? We know what to do. We think we know what to do. We can't seem to take a decision because there isn't enough data, enough proof, or enough consensus. So a maturity model often can help define when the right steps should be taken about certain things. And then our dear friend Moises, I'm not going to read this to you, but the part that I find most fascinating here, I don't know if this is the button. Well, I better leave this alone. I found it very interesting to say that the role of innovation teams is to assess the level of maturity of the innovation competency to determine the level of initiatives. It's a timing issue of what scale of initiatives do we take on in a holistic way versus ad hoc versus sort of trial and error experimentation, okay? So I'll just stress line 3. Imaginatik is in the deep change business. That's the business we're in. We're in the deep change business. We're working with organizations that want to materially change their innovation success. And that means deep change. And therefore, these other rules apply, bottom line. And that's just what it is. And we recognize that. It's hard work. Those fellows who compete with us would say it's foolish work. There are software companies who say, you guys can have all of that. We just want to sell software and pray it attaches, and if it doesn't, not my problem. I was paid the license. We're out of here. I don't know that they're totally wrong, because it's actually a very interesting model. It's probably a higher ROE model. But we've decided, in Imaginatik's heritage is, it's about the change. It's about the journey. It's what my colleagues do so well, is it's about getting from A to B. And to do that, you got to know where A is. Where are we, really? And how do I get to B? And you have a printout, by the way, of this overall journey stuff in your handout. Okay? For me, number 2 is key. Holistic. Holistic, holistic. How do we have some notion, by the way, do you have to redraw that chart once a year? Of course. Things change. But at least you have a chart that's holistic, and it leads to decision-making and action. That's very crucial. And then, you know, the Holy Grail being, we were with an organization that's not here that had a spectacular breakthrough outcome in their offerings to customers in the financial services area. And the mandate from the CEO was, let's replicate that. We need to do more of X. So without mentioning the name, we need to do more of these. In fact, Courtney knows who it is. We need to do more of this stuff. And everybody said, well, but we don't quite know how we did that. I mean, it just kind of happened. And on analysis, what was discovered was to get that product done, which is an iPhone-based, this company, I mean, today you can scan your checks and deposit them. This company invented that stuff 6 years ago. And it's a huge company, and they were doing it for 3 years before anybody else even caught on to it. So for 3 years, they're way the hell out in front. Then you find out the way they got that done is they broke every single risk management and approval rule in the whole company. That in fact, that outcome couldn't be duplicated because all there was prevented from happening. So when the CEO was briefed on this, he said, well, that's dumb. Who did that? And they're all looking at him going like, well, you've set up all these rules, so we can't do these things anymore. So they've had to say, well, we want to do this sustainably more often, not just one time. So let's make sure we know who we are, where we're going, that we've eliminated some of these barriers that stand in our way, and we take proper risks. Okay. An example, Glenda is from Society of Petroleum Engineers, organization we work with, and I'm only going to mention, this is back to Jim's comment of top-down support. This organization is so successful that theoretically, they don't have to do anything. In fact, they're almost limiting membership growth. They're doing so well. However, the CEO said, but there are clouds, and they're pretty dark, and they may be 1 or 3 years away, and we must be more relevant in 2 to 3 years. And we've tried innovation 2 and 3 different times with various levels of success, sometimes not much. We need a game plan instead of ad hoc sporadic efforts. We really need to do this right this time. And Glenda and many people now are part of the organization that are making all this happen after a whole cycle with them. Let's see, this might even work. Okay, so what does this mean? There are 6 capabilities to deliberately build. Underline deliberate. Deliberately build. Not accidental, not we kind of stumbled on it, we'll get to it sometime. And far from being prescriptive, you're going to want to deal with all of them at some pace. Clearly, this is why Chris's great plan of putting me right after Jim is here, because culture's right in the middle. It's a huge deal. I mean, for this wheel to really fly around, the culture's got to be super right. But you can see strategy, leadership, process and tools, resources, and organization. Okay. Do these overlap? Of course. Of course. Is it possible to look at them, however, in a separate way to some extent and try to improve each and make sure that the touch points and the handoffs work? Of course, also. So this is, you know, no assertion here, because there are strategy elements that are in culture, there's resource stuff in organization, but by and large, with the methodology we've developed, and we've had our whole organization put energy into it, and we're bouncing it off of clients, it works really well. And in a short amount of time, what you're able to do, and here's a quick overview of what these 6 are and what falls into them. We're able to assess, for example, take strategy. It's very interesting. I'll pull one of Jim's comments. Under strategy, and by the way, this is high level, we have many questions that test out the ranking of a company on strategy. And one of the interesting ones is to say, where is innovation on the board of directors' agenda? And you know, usually you'll get a, what? And yet it's like, we're the innovative company in our category. Okay. It's not on the board of directors' agenda. Okay, so where is it in your quarter executive meetings? You know, what? It's not on there either. You know, so you start looking at a number of questions to understand what is the degree to which this has been either operationalized or really taken seriously in a number of areas. Not as criticism, it's just to get usually the senior management team to align on where are we really? Let's not kid ourselves. Let's really understand for strategy right down through organization. And organization, one of the really interesting issues often is, and I think it might have been, somebody brought this up earlier, how is innovation embedded into job descriptions? Let's really look at how much of everybody's daily job, real job is this? Or is this sort of elective, or is it sort of a, you know, sort of a fire alarm when it's needed? After a bad quarter, we all are innovative quickly. So without going through all these, there is a whole questionnaire, discussion, workshop effort to cull this out and essentially paint a picture that basically looks like this. It basically says, look, and you can't see all of the lines in here, but this is good enough. Essentially, you are likely to fall in between, at or in between one of these. And I suppose, like taking your physical, if you did it twice in a year, it might be a little bit different, but it'll be pretty close unless you've dramatically changed your exercise, dramatically changed your diet, or something else genome-wise happened to you. You're probably not too far off at any point in 1 year, but over 2-3 years, you can really move this needle. And that's the whole point, is to do this systemically, not accidentally, and move up the sustainable capability scale. Incidentally, without revealing any confidentialities, most organizations to get level 3 to 4 is a 5 to 8 year journey. I mean, so that's giving you a sense to get all the way up there, even moving from initiated to systematized, 2 to 3 years. But it's very rewarding when you see some of the outcomes we're going to show here in a moment. Okay. By the way, we do have one sea salted caramels brought in overnight from Las Vegas. So if anybody has a great question, the audience will decide. The crowd will decide who gets it. Okay. All right. Let's see. And then you see a little description here. I mean, again, there is a whole body of stuff underneath it. So part of what we do, back to being a linguist, is one of the big deals here is to get the language the same among management and the leadership. Just getting the same language of what it means that leadership endorses projects versus they lead them. That distinction alone is so serious where people understand the levels of commitment. Because for many, hey, we're innovative around here. We already do all this stuff. And Phil's smiling, and you're going to see why when he presents his. So getting this language right of what does it mean to be at initiated versus embedded versus optimized, I'd say the common language that comes out after some workshopping, that alone is worth so much that people can start making better decisions faster and say, that's ahead of us, or we should have done this by now, or we should have done it already before. So some of that is kind of what we're trying to do, is get some normalization of behavior and ideas. And you begin to see, and again, it's a little hard to see, but again, take just this one being number 4, innovation processes. And within innovation processes, there are 6 elements. You can see that. To the degree to which there are defined roles, budgets, investments, willingness to make time. Someone else was just mentioning during the break, we want to do more innovation, but we can't find the time. We know, believe me, we hear that all the time, and we measure it. And the degree to which you look outside, 4.5, or staffing for innovation. So there is a grid, and you end up with scoring. You end up scoring across this whole dimension, across all 6. And you end up with a chart that, if you could tell, it's a spider chart, and obviously one's going to be your current stage, and one's going to be your future stage. Now again, is this scientific at the 6 sigma level of accuracy? No. There is room for, amongst management, to debate, are we really, only a 3.5 in strategy? And someone might say, we're a 3.8. Truly, it doesn't matter. The fact is you have a gap between that and 4, and or you're well up, and as opposed to other dimensions, you probably could spend less time on that anyway. You're really hurting in process and tools, or you really need to make a much bigger investment in organization. That's holding you back. Okay? So we're really trying to have people achieve consensus, make decisions, take action in a holistic way to reach a desired state. And I'd say, isn't this, and I'll stop here for a second for any questions. We have a few more slides and we're done. But isn't this really the issue that in the orange, often the issue isn't we don't know what to do. It's amongst the choices we could make, what are the actions we're going to take with scarce resource? We have scarce resource, often people being the scarcest. Which actions will we take this period that will help us attain our innovation goals? Questions, comments? Anybody want to harumph, disagree? You violently disagree? Over here, sure.
In larger organizations where there's multiple business units or multiple functions, that the maturity differs among them. And if so, how do you get them to converge to get more towards a 4 without sustainable metrics all the time?
Right. So absolutely, it will, we had this discussion, and Ramon was with me, amongst others, in New York City with a potential organization. Absolutely, this will be at the SBU or business level. And you can almost imagine a portfolio of maps. I mean, sort of to start boiling the seas and creating some real temperature in here. Most large companies will have a variety of roadmaps because different organizations are at different places. And I would argue, for the reasons Jim mentioned, there are some businesses that don't need to be that innovative for the next year or two relative to their performance and maybe the opportunity space, and others that need to be more. So they would have different metrics by organization, positively, and that would be helpful. That's partly why this is so key, because this helps solve the one-size-fits-none method of management in most areas, which is one set of metrics for every business for innovation, and this is what you use, and it may not be relevant for most of them. It may be relevant for one. So you want to really tailor to the business what's going to help achieve your goals. Was that a great question, guys? Yes. Winner of the next chocolate. That was excellent. The crowd decided. Any other questions? Yep.
The strategy part of your roadmap, is that the innovation team or practice strategy or the business strategy?
Innovation team strategy. And so often what we find is, because of skill sets, in addition to difficulty having business case development skills, many great innovation teams may lack strategy skills. They're actually great on execution, even engineering, experimentation, but strategy skills may not be as developed. So the group may say, well, here's the corporate strategy, let's get going on these initiatives. And there's no innovation strategy to bridge the organization's corporate strategy to what the team's going to do. So this is really speaking to innovation strategy. Okay, good. It's consulting work, therefore, by definition, 3 phases, right? What else? You know, and it flows, you know, right to left, and it has time. But I mean, to give you a sense, in its fullest, this is work. This is real work. I mean, this is, you know, I mean, I can tell you, we have talked to organizations who basically say that. This is work. We don't want to do it. I mean, this is, this is going to really take some work. But that's what, if you're serious about innovation and you want to reboot it, we certainly find organizations that benefit greatly from it. So I'm not going to go through all of it, but there's a number of ways to collect inputs, achieve consensus. This is facilitated, and it's meant essentially to achieve a reasonably agreed to, it's very hard to say unanimous, but reasonably agreed to roadmap for innovation that guides the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and then you probably start over internally on your own. Okay. And milestones, I mean, we could go into more definition, but I mean, there's a lot of good milestone stuff, and we have a lot of detail of what happens each one. You know, I'd say it's interesting, as trite as this sounds, you see under a line, definition of innovation. You must say, you're kidding. I cannot tell you how often that's crucial. What is innovation at this organization? Just getting that done begins to get a team to talk to each other and define horizons, define the size of the bet, the timing. Under current future levels, I'd say one of the things that's discovered often in the current future levels area is that the organization hasn't figured out who makes decisions about innovation. So the governance machine isn't set up even to make the decisions. So we've got to kind of get that going. And certainly in the roadmap, probably the recommended investments and key success factors. You know, it's often, especially on the people side, how many of you know, the innovation is the great voluntary career area where you're having to borrow, steal and cheat assets to get your job done. So we really try to make sure all that's laid out, and then we have some revisits. Alternatively, and this is something that we're experimenting with, is for many reasons, and one of them being time famine, some organizations want an accelerated snapshot of just where are we today, and just give us some top actions we might take. We can't go through the whole 2-3 month project right now, or we don't choose to, and so we're offering an alternative for a very quick snapshot view of where you are with an idea of next steps, the alignment that's required, and I think this is often an alternative way to start for your organizations. Okay? Clear so far? We're about to end. 1, 2 slides. How are we doing on time? Good? Okay, good. So how can this help? Because you could say, well, are there benchmarks? Are there baselines? Are there reference models? And we're still working on a library of those. But to give you an example, we think there's a different type of leader style depending on the level. Now, could this vary at your organization? It might. It depends on some other dynamics. Some industries move faster than others. Some have different management styles. But as a notion, think of it as there are at least 4 distinct styles of leadership that we've identified that might apply. And if your business is optimized, you're probably, and not unlike Moises, spending more time driving change than you are catalyzing and trying to build momentum or coalition for success. That's already there. You have a totally different challenge. Vice versa, sometimes when it's embedded, there's a need almost for an internal consulting approach. Cargill does this, where their innovation team is almost an internal consulting team. And they're regarded as innovation SMEs to go work with the businesses. And they don't need so much leadership. They just need, like, give us the business, the horsepower, so we staff you as almost a consulting organization. So it's going to vary depending on your maturity. Number 2, how you organize those resources changes quite a bit over time. And I won't go into it in great detail. Phil's going to speak to a number of points along this area, but you know, there's one, always the first question we're asked is centralized or decentralized? Well, that's just one of the choices. That's on the Chinese menu, that's just one. Frankly, it's a little bit more complicated than that because it depends on, again, maturity. We think, for example, the usage of champions, and you know, Glenda and we are talking and working on that, but many of you have experienced that. We think champions are essential, whether you call them champions, catalysts, at any big organization. Early on in the maturity of innovation, it is very difficult for a central team to pull that off because you almost need Trojan horse resources throughout the entire organization to be helping you. But they may not be nearly as helpful at a later stage where you have satellite R&D centers, satellite innovation offices, all coordinated by the center. Okay? So the models will change over time, and our talented team can assist you to define that depending on where you are, where you're going. And lastly, let's talk about enablement. When you're starting out, ideas is enough. Collecting ideas, gathering ideas. At some point, though, you switch from ideas to wanting to engage your associates or engage your customers or vendors. Ideas are just not enough. Move beyond that, and we see customers in the level 3 saying, execution's the game. We've got to execute so much better at the back end. We have either covered the other 2 or we're beyond that. And increasingly, as more organizations start approaching level 4, we're very excited about, and some of you saw the work that Rob and our fantastic development team have delivered. We think this area of network-centric innovation is the future. I mean, the idea that it goes beyond one campaign, one department, one team to your network inside the business, your network outside the business. It's way more profound than any one team or unit or campaign. That area takes a certain advanced level of maturity because it would make little sense to talk about that when you're just getting started. You're really trying to learn the first habits of contribution and good hygiene around sharing and collaboration. Okay? These are just 3 dimensions. To wrap up, may sound strange, but it does take a commitment to improve innovation. And sometimes that commitment isn't there. The timing's not right. It may happen later. It may happen with a different CEO. or a different set of champions, sponsors. It may happen because an accidental initiative turns out to be very successful and everybody says, now's the time. Have to have some dedicated program management resources. I mean, that's kind of understood, but that's sometimes hard. It's sometimes hard to free up a star. I mean, Glenda was working on a lot of other great initiatives before the CEO or president says, Glenda, we need you to guide this, and they're going to have to backfill and figure out how to do that. So it does take some very strong leadership and program management, and just taking some hard decisions, because what happens is, innovation has many fans and many sponsors, but not a whole lot of people often are accountable for it. So when you get to number 5 and the group has to make hard decisions, some of what's been worked on as innovation has to stop. Literally, initiatives have to stop, projects have to stop, organizations are going to change. So tough decisions will have to be made in order to make the innovation success happen that you're looking for. 1 or 2 questions and we're done. Any parting thoughts, ideas? Yeah, right here.
One of the points you made earlier was that there are software companies out there that are just saying, have at it. How often do you run into, in client conversations, a willingness or a desire to sort of leave it to the technology or leave it to the tool and oversimplify the innovation process and say, if we get X, whether it's a software package or a set of tools, we'll solve the problem? And how much time do you spend coaching people out of that misperception?
A fair amount. I mean, that's out there. It's interesting. What's really interesting is to see, where does innovation reside in an organization? And if it resides in the information or technology group, that's not bad. It depends on the nature of the leadership of that group. So when innovation is defined as collaboration, we get people who come and say, look, we just want people to collaborate. And we talk about the business process and the higher theory of innovation. They're like, no, leave all that alone. We just want people to collaborate. And their metric may be how many people come into the site per day. If that's their measurement, there is virtually nothing we can tell them or try to coach them to change their mind. That's going to be the measurement. That's the solution they want. Versus at Exelon, and Dennis is here from Exelon, Exelon is a really interesting company because Sonny Garge is the Chief Information and Innovation Officer, CIIO, and he really cares about this group driving profound innovation throughout the whole energy company. So he looks at it totally differently. And he's really interested around, where are our smartest, most innovative people in the whole network? And even if long-tail stuff to Rob Spencer, even if they only come in once a month, I don't care, because if they're the best contributor, once a month is fine. So he's got a totally more sophisticated view of the metrics. Yeah. One last question? Yeah.
I've noticed quite a few large companies that have gone into this field. How important is it? We're also a large company, $15 billion, 4 subsidiaries, large subsidiaries. I know there are groups all the way from the board level on down that are involved in an innovative strategy.
Right.
How important is it to find those groups and network with them to find out a common vision for the company versus, we're not a P&L center, our department in corporate, just going and doing it. We have top-level support, but, we're one of several groups that could lead or we could band together and lead.
Yeah. Again, I think we have great practitioners in the room that could help. One answer I'd give is that we're huge believers in sponsor-led innovation, and that we think it's crucial to have a business unit leader, ideally, somebody who's tied to a P&L, or a group head, ideally on the business side, be the sponsor for your activities of innovation. So it's possible that there could be 2 or 3 slightly different strands of innovation in a business that is perfectly tied to that business's markets and economics. So we would counsel do it with them versus do it for them. So it's the with them And that with them can vary quite a bit, more hands-on, hands-off. But having, and within your organization, I think, there's going to be, I mean, the best thing you can do, and maybe Phil's going to speak to this, is to find a sponsor who is willing to truly partner with you within the organization to test out your services and solutions. That's the best possible case because you have begun to solve some of the buy-in, coalition, adoption hurdles that get in the way of success. Is that helpful to you? We can talk more about it after. But I think I will give you an example. It's a little off topic, want to move on. But where we see repetitive failure in innovation efforts within a company is when the innovation team does it for you and doesn't quite understand. And that's happened a little bit to breakthrough or revolutionary innovation teams in Skunkworks. So did anybody from the Hartford show up? I mean, the Hartford had a fantastic group called White Stag, which has since blown up. And fantastic organization to do breakthrough work. And essentially, the business units ate them up for lunch. Just, pretty soon it was like, the more successful they were, the more the resources were questioned. It was just very difficult. Now, that was a little bit off my point, but the key thing is to align with that business unit or the master. I mean, the Whirlpool situation is so rare. It is so rare that it really starts CEO orchestrated from the top. And don't we all wish that happened more often? It doesn't happen very often. It's often a rogue or visionary business leader, SBU leader, and sometimes a very daring functional leader who comes in and wants to drive this change. One last question from Jerry, and then we're going to turn it over.
Actually, I just wanted to sort of build on that, and I don't have a question. I might after I make my point, but just sort of to reiterate, it's always better to be invited than to crash a party. And particularly when the party is people that you ultimately want to do business with and create value from. And urgency is generally the best ingredient to get invited to a party, whether it be, top line growth, profitability, and efficiencies within the organization. So, what we try to do is really, we take a very decentralized approach. We're a team of 3 that serve like 11,000 employees in 35 countries, and we don't want to grow by a single resource because we figured out a way to really partner and work with people that want to work with us and do deep dives and essentially do a competency or knowledge transfer so that they carry the ball after we leave for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th time. But one of the points I wanted to kind of make also is that a lot of times, and we sort of discovered this the hard way, a lot of times in innovation, there's this inherent confusion between solution and problem. And a lot of people make that misstep early on and go right to the solution. And what we try to do is essentially say, if it is, let's say, top-line growth, and you're invited to a party by a business unit leader, we really try to start the whole discussion around 3 simple questions, which is, where do you want to play, right? And really sort of translation, what lake versus ocean do you want to focus on?
Right.
It could be sales and marketing, it could be product, it could be segment. Where do you want to play? And then within that, once you've established that, then what do you want to solve for, right? What's, if it's sales and marketing or new segments or new products, right? If you can't crystallize the problem and it's not within your capacity or competency to solve it, move on.
Right.
And then once you've done that, and then that's hard work because people don't want to do that in the beginning. They want to always go to the idea and the solution, right? But once you've done that, you'll find more often than not that the ideas really begin to surface because you have that inherent focus established up front, and you have an easy means by which you can engage constituents from within your entire organization. So,
Jerry,
for what it's worth.
Thank you for those comments, Jerry. Folks, thank you very much. Appreciate it.